Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
So I looked up some cliche terms for being conned, and here's what I found. Being taken for a ride, taken to the cleaners, had the wool pulled over your eyes, or been given the runaround. Some other words are kind of funny ones. There's bamboozled, hoodwinked, suckered, flim-flammed, fleeced, scammed, or ripped off. Some of those I feel like must have been like 20s slang or something like that. Flim-flammed. Nobody ever says that anymore. As funny as these words can be, it is certainly not funny when it happens. There are people out there who will take advantage of any opportunity to steal, and sometimes they even use tricky emails and text messages to get what they need to get access to your funds. That's why you never respond to a text with all of your personal information, and you don't respond to an email that way, and you don't click risky links from people you don't know. I don't wish being conned on anyone. At the same time, we have to be wary of our own greed, and we need to be reminded sometimes about the uncertainty of wealth. Hey, this is Jen. You're listening to the Bible for Busy People, and no, you are not being bamboozled or hoodwinked. I too am a busy person, and we are just taking time out of our busy days to look deeply into Scripture, to look at the context and the language, and really be able to apply these words to our lives. This week, we are talking about worthlessness, things that God considers worthless. Today, we're reading in Luke 12, starting in verse 13. It says, "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' Jesus replied, 'Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?'" He gets a little sassy there. Then he says to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God." The bookends on this passage are significant, starting with the charge to be wary of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And then it finishes with a note about not storing up for yourself instead of being rich toward God. Jesus' reaction to this is strong. You'll notice exclamations in verse 15 where he says, "Watch out." And verse 20, that's where God says, "You fool." Jesus takes the hoarding of wealth seriously. And you know what? I think he also takes seriously when we store things up for ourselves, but we're not generous towards other image bearers of God. He moves on a bit more gently with a promise in Luke 12:22, which says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, and a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. God takes care of our needs. Our worry and fear lead to hoarding for ourselves instead of generosity. God meets our needs so that we don't have to be afraid of scarcity. Remember that God's math is not our math. I was just talking about this the other day with someone. God does not give equal to what we give. We could never give up to God's level. God gives so much generously above and beyond what we could even hope to try to match ourselves. I'm thinking about the atrocious math series we did a couple months ago. The atrocious math concept is talked about by Philip Yancey in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace. And he talks about just how it doesn't even make sense how generous God is with us. It doesn't even compute. And we go through different stories in the Bible that kind of talk about math that does not make sense. And one of those stories was when Jesus honored the poor widow who gave only 2 small copper coins. Compared to everybody else in that verse, she gave very little. Everybody else gave out of their abundant wealth, and she just gave 2 small copper coins. But Jesus honored her because it was everything she had to live on. The Bible tells us again and again to give generously, not foolishly, but generously, to not be overly concerned about saving and hoarding and conserving our wealth for ourselves, but to remember to keep in mind that we ought to share like God shares with us. Another needed reminder for this is in 1 Timothy 6, starting in verse 17. It says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." And that's another place where it says that we are storing up treasure for ourselves in heaven by being generous here in this world. I also love that that is associated with the life that is truly life. Now, it is hard to read some of these things knowing how little some have in this world. It's hard to say that God will provide when that feels more uncertain than wealth. And yet, I've heard so many stories of just the right amount coming when it was needed, of neighbors sharing generously with each other, and of those with little still sharing what they have. Sometimes it's hard to imagine, but I really do believe that we can cultivate God's economy in this world, even a world that values capitalism and individual wealth. So how can we be rich towards God? I think it's clear that being generous towards others is one way to be rich towards God. But what else might you think and what else might you consider when it comes to being rich towards God? Let's talk again tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to The Bible for Busy People. If you need prayer or want to go deeper in your faith, visit our show notes. Will you take a moment to share with a friend and leave a review? It helps the Bible get into even more people's minds and hearts. Find more podcasts that will recharge you at purposely.com.